Okay, here we go again. I got a few technical glitches out of the way. The microphone was not working for a brief time, so I had to put in a call to my audio engineer down in Tiburon, Dennis. So here we go. Another Midnight Skeptic show. You are listening to KPCA LP, Petaluma, California, at 103.3 FM and worldwide at www.kpca.fm. And this is the Midnight Skeptic. The views of the Midnight Skeptic are not, repeat, not necessarily the views of KPCA or any of its affiliates. Okay, the play-in music came off well again, and again, thank you, Dennis, for that. This is the month of May, and it's the 13th, and I'm recording it on, this is Thursday, and it will be broadcast again this coming Sunday at 9 p.m. as usual, 103.3 FM around here in Petaluma and southern Sonoma County. Okay, first, let's get a few shout-outs out of the way, and head of Dr. David Rubin. Talked to him at noon today and kind of went over some of what I was going to be talking about, and he gave me some hints about organizing and what things I should emphasize and how to keep my notes more organized than they usually are, which is definitely a help. Okay, shout outs. I'm going to go over these quickly again. First, the Sonora crowd, Bob and Sandy Fisher and Nurse Martha. Take care of yourself, and I'm glad to hear that things are kind of easing down, and hope you don't have to work too many double shifts. And Brad, and Darrell Larson, and Leonidas Maciel, and Judy May, and Rosie Negrete down in Mexico City. You listen every now and then, so good for you, and I hope you're enjoying this. The East Coast crowd, Geraldine Goldfinger out on Long Island, Nelson Idell down in Sarasota, Florida, and then locally in Sebastopol, Rich and Kathy Berger, and down in Pacifica, Stan and Kathy Gustafson. Down in Arizona, my brother Brandon and his wife Mina, and another nurse in the family, Andrea, working in a local hospital down there near Santan Valley, Arizona, with her 3 little terrorist kids. A hubby, Tim, that stays home and takes care of them all. He's a retired Marine Corps, so booyah! Patagonia, Arizona, Karina Hilliard, the snake lady, snake removal person extraordinaire. Okay, Mickey Huff, locally. He has a show on KPCA LP, 103.3 FM, Wednesdays at 3 o'clock. And he's a history professor and the godfather of Project Censored. And then Tim Conrad, also from Sonora, but now living in Sonora, California. Okay, and then I already mentioned Dr. David Rubin down in the Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina area. I hope you all listen in now and then. Okay. Last show, and by the way, these shows are repeated 2 Sundays in a row. Sunday nights at 9 p.m. I just, this is too much work, too much stress, too much effort to do this every single week. So I tried to do it for a while. When I first was doing the Midnight Skeptic, actually in the studio of KPCA at Petaluma Community Access. I was doing it every week, but wow. I want the things that I say on the Midnight Skeptic here to be accurate. I'm not a Republican that lies about everything. That was a semi-joke. So the COVID came along, and we shut down, and about 3 or 4 months before the COVID outbreak last year, January last year, February last year, I decided, and my audio engineer Dennis decided to set up the studio like right here. The YouTube people are seeing this right now, and I'm in my tutoring office. The tutoring business is also going to resume in-person tutoring next week. And, I missed it. I tried a Zoom tutoring session on a couple of occasions, and it just doesn't really work well or well enough for my standards. I like to actually see what my tutoring students are doing right in front of me so I can correct things as they come up. Okay, enough of that. The last Midnight Skeptic show, I started a new segment called ICU. Okay, well, that in hospital parlance, that's intensive care unit. Well, for the Midnight Skeptic, ICU stands for Ignorant Creep Update. And the first one that I talked about was brain freezes. I love them. I love them. I love them. Well, oh geez, why do these? Oh, Rick Santorum. Geez, how could I possibly have a brain freeze on that ignorant creep's name? Anyway. So I went on and on and on about Rick Santorum and his anti-gay and anti-this, anti-that screeds. Well, okay. Well, who am I going to talk about this time? I get tired of just bashing the low-hanging fruit. The Marjorie Taylor Greenes and the Matt Gaetzes and Lauren Boebert and Mitch McConnell's of the GOP. Those creeps are just not worth my time anymore. So I thought about it and thought about it. Well, who's the next ignorant creep that update that I can talk about? Well, you might not agree with me. Not everybody out there agrees with me. It's your loss. So I came up with Mitt Romney. Okay, now he's been a lifelong Republican. His father, George Romney, was a senator for a long time and then ran for president once on the Republican ticket and lost, thank goodness. So, I've been tired of beating dead horses. So, Mitt Romney, you are the recipient of this week's ICU, Ignorant Creep update. I tried to come up with a truly odious Republican that combined hypocrisy, religiosity, self-interest above all, and refusal to denounce the Trump cult, and throw in a little bit of misogyny just for kicks. And then we come up with Mitt Romney. Okay, he was booed at the Utah State GOP convention, booed very vociferously, and he got up in front of his audience at the podium, and he asked, "Aren't you ashamed of yourselves?" And essentially, I'm paraphrasing everything that he said there, but he said essentially, "Don't you know who I am? I've been a lifelong Republican. Don't you know who my father was?" George Romney, and Utah is the least racist state in the USA. Well, that in itself can be argued. He opposed the marriage equality in his home state, but publicly opposes discrimination against gay people. Well, you can't have it both ways, although he wants to. Um, this is a quote from him. "The children of America have the right to have a father and mother, not parent A and parent B, but a mother and a father." Yeah, he wants it both ways. He wants to be seen as quite liberal for a Republican. He's not. Like I say, he opposed the Equality Act, including he opposes the Equality Act, and that's winding its way through the Senate and the House of Representatives back in Washington right now. And this new Equality Act will include LGBTQ people in this country to be included in non-discrimination practices. Okay, and he has also said, and the leaders of the Mormon Church, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS, same-sex marriage is an apostasy. Now, that's a religious term meaning a belief that's not officially the belief of whatever church we're talking about, in this case, the Mormon Church. Okay, another thing that I detest about him is his company, Bain Capital, B-A-I-N, and they earned the well-deserved reputation as being one of the great vulture capitalist companies or vampire investment companies in this country. What they would do is, not every company in this country is successfully run or is making tons of money. Well, a lot of companies struggle. And, well, here comes Bain Capital to offer the owners of whatever company is struggling, offer them an infusion of cash, buying the company, and then doing one of two things. Either propping up the company and making some internal changes and putting the company back on its feet. That's the ideal thing that happens. In reality, 95% of the time that Bain Capital came in there and put a cash infusion into them, they took it over and then fired everybody and then sold off either the entire company to some larger holding company, or chopped up the company into its various divisions and sold the divisions individually to other companies or other holding companies. The resulting situation is that lots and lots of people lost their jobs. Bain Capital increased the unemployment in this country. They did not help it. The only thing that really happened consistently is that Bain Capital made lots and lots and lots of money, both for Mitt Romney himself and others who were in the upper echelons of Bain management. I don't know how many employees Bain management Bain Capital had, but not many. It didn't take many to just do the paperwork and sit around a conference table and think about, well, how can we make more money off these poor suckers that supposedly were trying to help. Anyhow, that's what a vampire investment company is, and Bain Capital, founded and run by Mitt Romney. That's what their purpose is to make money, and at the expense of the working class, essentially. And, well, all of the billions of dollars that Mitt Romney made, his family made, well, where is most of it? He doesn't invest a whole heck of a lot of it into local businesses or local companies. Where does he stash it? The Cayman Islands. Okay, so that was a big gripe of his when he was running for president himself against Barack Obama in, 2012 election. Yeah. Okay, so that is the ignorant creep update. He is really an oily character. He just looks like a guy that would just fire your dad or for anything, as long as it was good for Bain Capital. All right. Enough of that. Okay, I will have another ignorant creep update for you on the next Midnight Skeptic show. All right, now let's switch places here, switch topics here. The Republican Party is having a meltdown right now. Excuse me, I've been fighting I don't know what it is, a small cold or whatever, for about the past week now. And I haven't taken anything for it. It's just, and it's not a reaction to my COVID-19 shots either. I had my second shot about 4 weeks ago down at Kaiser Hospital, right close to here. They were very efficient in how they did it. I had my head turned and was BSing with this really nice-looking nurse, and then I got so engrossed in our conversation that I didn't even realize when the other nurse on the other side of me rolled up my sleeve and fluffed up my rapidly deteriorating deltoid muscle and then jabbed the shot in there. But it was over. No side effects, no nothing. Okay. The GOP, they're bereft of actual ideas that will benefit the American public. I mean, that's not news. Instead, they're trying to suppress the vote. I think the count is up now to 37 different states that Republicans have introduced some sort of voter suppression laws. Georgia is the most famous of them. And I've talked about that on previous shows. And they are picking on the bullies that the Republicans are, the T of the LGBTQ community. And T is trans people. Okay, I've talked about this as well on previous shows, specifically trans women athletes. Now, there's a whole raft of Republican-sponsored bills that would deny trans women the ability to participate in youth sports or school sports. And that specific topic I've talked about, and I think I mentioned it quite a bit on the last Midnight Skeptic show and the one before that. A number of states have passed laws banning trans girls or trans women from K up through 12 of not being able to participate in school sports. Now, this definitely is a problem, is not a problem, but they've passed laws to solve a non-issue. And well, first of all, there aren't that many trans kids in schools at all. We had a raft of bathroom bills 2, 3, 4 years ago that were winding its way through state houses. North Carolina comes to mind. And they lost, an all-star game, I believe, in North Carolina. I think the NBA removed its all-star game from Charlotte because of that issue. Anyway, we don't hear much about bathroom bills anymore because even Republicans were able to realize finally that it was just a non-issue and a silly issue. And now they're picking on trans athletes, transgender women. Okay. Yes, in fact, it would be a bit unfair if a guy who has gone through puberty with his, muscle mass intact and after his own puberty, like a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid who at that time decides, well, I want to transition and become a girl. Well, according to Republican thinking, and I use that term loosely, very loosely, there's a threat across the board to our girl athletes. Well, we're talking maybe 1 or 2 or 3 in like the whole nation that does this. It's not a tidal wave of trans women trying to intrude upon girls' athletics. It's just ridiculous. But ridiculousness does not stop Republicans from passing laws to pick on some group. And it's those kind of laws are being egged on by the religious right, the Southern Baptists. Okay. Where am I in my notes? They're right in front of me. And Dave Rubin, if you're watching this, they are organized, but I just get off on these tangents now and then. There is no group too small or too insignificant that GOP hate mongers won't stoop to gin up fears about and to bully. The GOP state lawmakers always say that their first concern is to protect our girls. Now, they said that in protecting our white women from black men. That's usually their stupid rationale for passing these stupid laws. Okay. Well, anyway, the GOP is casting around for issues that will gin up their base. And there's creeps in the GOP backroom think tanks that come up with these non-issues talking points to feed the GOP politicians. Okay, they've now seized upon CRT, which is mostly what I'm going to be talking about now. Well, WTF is that? CRT. There's a whole raft of GOP-sponsored anti-teaching of CRT bills winding its way through the usual suspected states: Idaho, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, all of those. Tennessee's another one. They're winding their way through these Republican state houses. Okay. CRT, critical race theory. Okay, well, what is that? It was a hot topic in academia, and that means colleges and universities, at the end of the 1970s, and it just kind of percolated there until now. And, well, what's different about now that wasn't happening in 2080 or 1980, 1990, and the 2000s? Well, a lot of police shootings of unarmed black men and an occasional woman has occurred, and we're becoming, as a nation, more and more aware of racial disparities in this country. Well, critical race theory is a is a historical framework. I haven't written these things down verbatim as how I should read them, but just words and phrases here and there. It's a historical framework for understanding America and the United States history in context of racial disparities. Okay, it seeks to answer the question, is America an inherently racist country? That itself has created a firestorm in political circles. Well, are we an inherently racist country or not? Do white people, in fact, have power and privilege in this country that other racial minorities do not have? Is there a power imbalance baked into the nature of America itself? Well, proponents of critical race theory would say yes, there is a power imbalance between specifically whites and blacks, and whites and the Latinx community. Okay, statistically, you can say, well, of course there is. And you can cite the wealth gap between whites and blacks. You can cite the incarceration rate disparity. You can cite environmental justice issues. The low-income black neighborhoods are more likely to be found in industrial areas of the town, next to refineries and other environmental hazards. All right. The 1619 Project came out last year. It was done up by the New York Times magazine. And I'm not going to go into all of the people that had a hand in this. Well, why was the 1619 Project even named that? Well, in August of 1619, this British ship, White Lion, I believe it was his name, pulled into this spit of land where ships tied up or dropped anchor that was right near the Jamestown colony. They had a whole shipload of African slaves. Now, they didn't go to Africa and get these slaves themselves. Portugal, um, they had a slaving station on the coast of Angola. And this particular boatload of slaves were marched from the interior of Angola out to this coastal slaving station run by the Portuguese, and loaded onto a Portuguese ship. I don't remember the name of that ship. It was probably named after some Catholic saint. But anyway, their destination was Veracruz on the coast of Spanish America, which is now Mexico. Anyhow, these two English raiding vessels caught this Portuguese ship and loaded some of these African slaves onto their own ship. And they were just a prized commodity that instead of a chest of gold or silver, they took the slaves. Okay. And then one of these English vessels, the White Lion, went up to the coast where they knew that there were some English colonies formed, in this case, Jamestown, dropped anchor, and some of the Jamestown colonists took 20 of these slaves, and in exchange for victualizing the ships, the food and fresh water and rum and blah, 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 all the things that this English vessel would need to complete its trip, which I presume would land it back in England. Excuse me for one moment. Oh, man. It's really annoying to have this condition. Anyway, these 20 slaves landed in Jamestown Colony in August of 1619, gave a name to this 1619 project. Well, Republicans, in their denial of the true history of this country, would prefer to whitewash everything historically about our country and teach a sanitized Disney version of United States history to our kids in our schools. Hence, some bills that are winding their way through Republican-controlled state houses prohibiting the teaching of CRT in our schools. And then they have the gall to complain about cancel culture. Okay, the 1619 project is a bedrock of CRT. America is an inherently and systematically racist country and defines its present as a racist country. In 1787, we had a constitutional convention where a compromise that was made between northern and southern states, where for representation and taxation purposes, 3/5 of all the slaves would be counted. Okay? Not, one slave, one white guy, another slave, another white guy. That wouldn't be 4 people. Slaves were, all of the slave population of a particular state would be enumerated, and then 3/5 of that number would be used to apportion representation in the House of Representatives. I'm going to have to excuse myself one more time. Man, I apologize to my listeners and my YouTube people out there. Okay, one of the things that occurred right around the Constitutional Convention was our being rewarded the Northwest Territories at the end of the Revolutionary War. Northwest Territories are essentially Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, and that area up there. We decided at the Constitutional Convention that whatever states would be made out of the Northwest Territories would be free states. Okay? Now, slavery was outlawed. Okay. Well, in 1820, we needed to make another compromise. Okay. Missouri, which was gaining population, enough population to make it into a state. The compromise was that Missouri would become a slave state in return for a separate free state called Maine. And this was in 1820. Okay. The Compromise of 1850 cut ahead another 30 years. California, after the gold rush of 1848 and 1849, California gained enough population to become a state on its own. Well, the compromise there was California would be admitted as a free state, but it was agreed that the northern states would more forcefully enforce the fugitive slave laws. Okay. Fugitive slave laws were when a slave would run away from their masters, get out of slavitude, and flee north to free states, local governments would help slave hunters who would come from the South in search of these runaway slaves. Okay. That sort of got the abolitionist movement off and running. Okay, the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 allowed for popular sovereignty. In other words, they would vote, the residents would vote on whether they wanted the state to become a free or slave state. And I'm really running down very quickly these compromises. If you people out there have heard of the term Bloody Kansas, well, that was a result of settlers from Missouri moving into Kansas, and settlers from the northern states coming into Kansas, and just to boost up the numbers of voters each way. And John Brown, the abolitionist who really did something about his beliefs, was a contributor to the reputation of Bloody Kansas. That's where he got his start. Okay, the last compromise that I'm going to talk about here is the compromise that ended Reconstruction. In the election of 1876, there was a near tie between the Republican Rutherford B. Hayes and the Democrat, oh boy, I can't remember the Democrat guy who ran across him, but it was thrown into the House of Representatives, and it was agreed that Rutherford B. Hayes, the Republican, which back in those days, the Republicans really were the party of Lincoln instead of these GOP creeps that we have now that claim to be the party of Lincoln. Anyway, it was agreed if Rutherford B. Hayes became president that he would end Reconstruction. Now, he was taking over for Ulysses S. Grant, who, the more I read about him, the more liberal Ulysses S. Grant seemed to be. Anyway, federal troops were pulled out of Louisiana and Florida and a few other places where they were stationed. And why did federal troops need to be stationed in the South? Well, to try to protect the lives of blacks and protect the lives of elected black officials, representatives. And the official end of Reconstruction in this country was March 31st, 1877. Okay, well, what started to happen right at that date was white terrorism all through the South. And so the suppression of blacks voting and just trying to live their lives began on that date. And it's been bad news ever since. I mentioned in the last show that that reparations as a topic kind of stem from these injustices that date from the end of Reconstruction, because the blacks were cheated out of their 40 acres and a mule that was promised to them by the federal government. And they were not allowed to be educated anymore. The Reconstruction schools that were established by hordes of Northern teachers coming down to establish these black schools. There's been a general lack of education stemming from the end of Reconstruction, and a lack of black property ownership by and large in the South, but the North is not blameless. Most Northerners wanted to keep blacks in their own neighborhoods. Segregation was de facto and, in many cases, de jure in the South. It was just de facto in the North. And there was a lot of racism in the North as well as the South. And so as a result of all this, black wealth has lagged far behind white wealth in this country. And generally speaking, familial wealth is tied up in home ownership. Now, I'm not talking about the white Romneys and the white billionaire class wealth. Just even middle class wealth is tied up in home ownership. And realtors up until relatively recently, have redlined neighborhoods with a gentleman's agreement not to sell to black families in what they feel should be white neighborhoods. Now, 13.4% of the U.S. population is black. And mass incarceration is another detriment to gaining family wealth in black families. 34% of the male prisoners in this country are black now. It's more than, well, let's see, it's almost triple the percentage of population in this country. So we have a long ways to go, or not we, meaning me, white guy, but black families have a long way to go to make up for lost time because of Jim Crow laws in the South, white realty agencies redlining neighborhoods, lack of education, mass incarceration, outright discrimination in hiring practices. So yes, there are a lot of arguments to be made for reparations. I am of a doubtful mind about how this should be accomplished. Should we set aside certain lands purchased maybe by the federal government and just doled out to potential black farmers? I did a segment on the last Midnight Skeptic show about how the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which was created back in the Franklin Roosevelt times in the New Deal and blah, 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 how the New Deal as it applied to farm subsidies was administered by local officials. Well, local officials in the South means white supremacist. And there's no way around that. So these local officials that were supposed to administer the United States Department of Agricultural programs meant to help black farmers they made sure that the vast majority of the money went to white farmers and richer landowners, white landowners in the South. Okay, so essentially, I hate to admit it, but this country has a history of racism baked into our national identity. And we should admit that and study it and welcome ideas about how this can be rectified. And the stupid-ass GOP politicians, especially in the state houses, are afraid that school kids in these southern states will, I don't know, hate themselves, feel guilty, and all sorts of bad things would accrue to our precious white students. Well, if this material is presented in the right way, that won't happen. But the GOP is a racist party. I'm not going to blunt any harsh talk about that. Okay, that's it for now on the CRT thing. I see. I have a little bit of time left. Okay, there's an article I ran across in our local newspaper uh, yesterday, and it was the San Francisco Chronicle, and it was written by Heather Knight. Uh, she's one of the regular contributors to the San Francisco Chronicle. And what caught my eye was the headline, which reads, "Efforts to change spousal rape laws stall in the California state legislature." I was just aghast. Uh, Spousal rape? Well, rape is rape. And it should be that raping your spouse should be no different than just raping anybody else. Okay, let me just read a few items out of here. Let's see. Does this help or not? After all, this is 2021. In so-called progressive California, why would anybody support old-fashioned laws distinguishing rape from rape, making the latter subject far more serious charge? Okay. Kolika Siegel, president of the California chapter of the National Organization of Women, teamed up with Dauber. Okay, this is Michelle Dauber. She was a women's attorney and a Stanford law professor. Anyway, these two women teamed up and along with other women's groups and progressive district attorneys to push for this simple change. Now, what's the change? If a policeman is called, a 415 family, and a wife comes to the door, answers the door, and says, "My husband raped me." Well, one of the things that a defense attorney would prove would be, well, that they are really married in order to have the spousal rape law apply, which is less punitive than just your standard rape. And she says, this is ridiculous. There should be no opposition to a bill that's stuck in the California legislature. The purpose of this law, potential law, would be to erase the distinction between marriage, rape, and raping of anybody else. Okay. Siegel said, whoever commits rape against a spouse or not should have parity and punishment. That's all we're asking for. By we're, that's women. Incredibly, when a defendant is charged with rape in California, the penal code requires prosecutors to prove the defendant and victim, quote, were not married to each other at the time of the intercourse. Okay, if they weren't married to each other, then it's the more severe rape, as considered by California. Okay, if found guilty, the defendant faces mandatory prison time in certain circumstances and may have to register as a sex offender for life. However, under the present state's spousal rape laws, a judge can sentence the defendant to probation in any circumstance, and registering as a sex offender isn't necessarily required. there's no such wording in the state spousal rape laws, which Dauber said, this is the Stanford professor of law, said makes it legal in California to rape your spouse if they've had a stroke or suffered a traumatic brain injury and can't give consent. Anyway, that would be the lowest of the low for a husband to have sexual intercourse with his wife if she's had a stroke and can't give consent. Why? Well, I guess there might be some guys that would do that, unfortunately. Okay, one more quickie item. Andrew Clyde, he's of course a Republican, and he's a candidate for the next Midnight Skeptic show's ICU, the Ignorant Creep Update. He's the guy that said the January 6th Trump rioters who invaded our Capitol were peaceful patriots. And it was nothing more than essentially a normal tourist visit. So he's trying to deny what we all saw with our own eyes on TV. And he's denying that. I think he's the point person for the Republican Party that are trying to whitewash this whole incident on January 6th and just make light of it. Officer sickness, death doesn't mean a damn thing to this Andrew Clyde. I'm going to research this DB. That's a euphemism for DOUCHEBAG. I don't think I'm allowed to say that on radio, so I won't. Okay, that does it for another Midnight Skeptic show. You have been listening to The Midnight Skeptic on KPCA LP, Petaluma, California. And we're at 103.3 on the FM dial and worldwide at www.kpca.fm. Support community radio at patreon.com/Petaluma Community Access. And remember, think critically, think logically, but live joyously, and most importantly, pet your cats. Okay, KPCA listeners, this coming Saturday, let's see, that'll be the 22nd. I'm sorry. Saturday, the 22nd, there's going to be a pop-up event in downtown Petaluma at Helen Putnam Park, and KPCA is going to have a booth there. For those of you who disagree with me, can show up there with your tomatoes and fling them at me. I can't believe that there's any people dumb enough to not disagree with me here in Petaluma. But, it takes all kinds. And when in the intro and outro segments, when I say the views of the Midnight Skeptic aren't necessarily that of PCA, I just can't understand why they aren't the views of PCA, but I've got to say that. So that's it for another show.